Good afternoon and welcome to the Disability 101 Understanding the Terms of Engagement webinar. It's great to see so many of you participating with today's action-packed agenda. As we begin, I'd love to introduce myself first. My name is Mary Brocker, and I have the wonderful opportunity of serving as the Executive Vice President of Operations of Bender Consulting Services. And as I am serving as your facilitator for the day, I'd love to begin by introducing today's event participants. First, our host is Christy Troutman, the Executive Director of the FISA Foundation. We'll hear a bit from Christy as we kick off the webinar. We have joining us today as our moderator, Gerald Homey. Gerald is the product manager of Bender's Careers to Be Workforce Development Program. And today, our primary speaker delivering incredible content is Sherry Lapaya. And Sherry is the manager of talent programs with Bender and the product manager of the iDisability e-learning product. So before we get started, Gerald, I want to, as our moderator, check in with you to see if there are any logistical items that we need to attend to.
Just a few pieces of information for the listeners. During the duration of the event, your microphones will be muted, so you don't have to worry about accidentally interrupting and creating noise. If you're interested in asking a question, go ahead and navigate to the chat window, the messaging, and you can type one in there. If you have any technical problems, I'll be there to help resolve it. Also in that chat is where you'll be able to access the link for live captioning, brought to you by Caption First. So I think with that, we're ready to get started.
Thank you so much, Gerald. I really appreciate that. And I'm so happy you mentioned Caption First. They're a great business partner of ours, and they happen to be a disability-owned business enterprise certified by the organization called Disability In. So today's webinar series is kicking off with Disability 101, and it's brought to you by the FISA Foundation and the Heinz Endowment. So as we kick off this program, I'd love to welcome Christy Troutman, Executive Director of the FISA Foundation, to share some opening comments and welcome all of you.
Thanks so much, Mary. This is Christy. I'm so proud to be Executive Director of the FISA Foundation, which is a charitable grant-making foundation focused on improving the lives of women, girls, and people with disabilities in southwestern Pennsylvania. As Mary said, FISA and the Heinz Endowments are so pleased to sponsor this webinar series as part of a joint initiative called Disability Inclusion and Access Moving Forward. The URL is on your screen. We invite you to visit the website for additional resources. We know that 20% of Americans live with a disability. People with disabilities are part of every community, including among the staff, volunteers, clients, and donors of nonprofits and foundations. We believe that organizations want to be inclusive, but many are not sure how. They don't mean to create barriers, but aren't sure how to recognize them or what to do. This webinar series will provide practical how-to tips to help you create a welcoming and inclusive environment for people of all abilities. We're very proud to partner with Bender Consulting, a global leader in promoting employment of people with disabilities, on this webinar series. Bender Consulting recognizes that many people with disabilities can and want to work, but still face barriers to getting hired. So the Bender Consulting team are experts in removing barriers and promoting inclusion, and they're going to bring their considerable expertise to you today through this webinar. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mary.
Thanks so much, Christy, and we really appreciate your leadership. I love this disability inclusion and access moving forward. As we are celebrating this year in 2020, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is very much exactly what our community would love to do, which is continue to move forward. So thank you for your leadership. So today, As we get started, I'm going to share a bit about who we are at Bender, and then I will pass things on to my colleague, Sherry Lapaya, who will drive much of the discussion. So I'll talk a bit about who we are and what we do. Sherry, as she talks about Disability 101, will review historical perspectives. She'll review current trends. She will also review inclusive communication basics. And then, of course, where the rubber meets the road is effectively implementing engagement strategies to, one, allow people living with disabilities to perform to potential, and two, allowing people with disabilities to properly access services as they are interacting in community and with businesses. So as we proceed through, a bit about me. Once again, I had operations for Bender. Bender was founded by Joyce Bender. She currently is our CEO and president. This year, we are celebrating Bender 25 as we celebrate ADA 25. And Joyce, incidentally, also serves as the CEO and founder of Bender Leadership Academy, a not-for-profit organization that is working to advance and reset the career trajectory for students living with disabilities. Joyce is a very prominent advocate in the disability community, is currently the vice chair of the American Association of People with Disabilities, an amazing organization headed by Maria Town, with the chair of their board as Ted Kennedy Jr. And Joyce also, as a woman living with epilepsy, which is the very reason she launched this crusade, is so excited to serve as the Epilepsy Association of Western and Central Pennsylvania chair of the board. Many who know Joyce may know that she has represented the United States State Department on information exchanges in places like Panama, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, and Kazakhstan. And there is no doubt about it, she is also the voice of Disability Matters with Joyce Bender, a weekly podcast that is on voiceamerica.com live Tuesdays at 2 p.m. and then, of course, available for download on Spotify and Apple and others. Joyce's business impacts both people with disabilities as well as people who have an interest in creating an inclusive workforce, private sector, regional employees, and as I say region, we are headquartered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, including Highmark, PNC Bank, Bayer Corporation, and Convestro, and then, of course, also public sector employers, the U.S. government, including the National Security Agency and the Office of Personnel Management. So just very quickly before we move on to Sherry, our 25 years of experience has resulted in being honored to deliver programs as it relates to talent. As Joyce Bender always says, where the rubber meets the road is people with disabilities getting jobs, software solutions. That's where we can scale and sustain. I talked about Sherry's role with our iDisability e-learning solution. We've got about 3 million business users on platform now. And then, of course, we move in the area of consulting with digital accessibility efforts, testing mobile apps, websites, and documents to make sure people with disabilities have the ability to interact with and consume content within those types of electronic communications vehicles, and then training. So at this point in time, it is absolutely my great pleasure to introduce Sherry Lapaya.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with everybody today about engaging with the disability community and how to effectively include them in our programs and support that we provide our community. We're going to start, as Mary said, with talking a little bit about some historical perspectives and current trends, look at some of the origins and impact of stigma in the disability community, and really think about the importance of that social model that the disability community employs when talking about their civil rights journey. So right now, as of October of 2019, for individuals with disabilities between the ages of 18 and 64, there is a large difference for individuals employed in this area compared to people without disabilities. In fact, the numbers are almost completely reversed. So for people with disabilities, 64.5% of those people are unemployed compared to 76.5 people without disabilities being employed. So those numbers are almost completely reversed. The American Community Survey estimates that the overall rate of people with disabilities in the U.S. population as of 2017 was 13.2% or 42.8 million people. So that's a large quantity of folks who are being left out and missing out on great opportunities to, participate in employment opportunities and be engaged. This area is really the unfulfilled promise of the ADA. So in the U.S., we'll be celebrating this July the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we've seen a lot of great strides with that. We've seen ramps being installed, lifts and elevators, closed captioning, braille, and other regular, accommodations that we've all just started to take for granted. But we are still seeing that barrier in the area of employment, and that largely comes from attitude and stigma and how that has impacted how we all think about people with disabilities. So, when you talk about stigma and you talk about how rooted that is, in the world and in this country, one of the things that has happened, in the history of the disability community is something called eugenics. And eugenics has played an unfortunate impact in how people think about disabilities, and this is really where we see stigma go too far. And this comes from the idea of to quote Dr. Josh Bell, citizenry purged of mental and physical handicaps. So, what the conversation is what can we do to prevent more people with disabilities from being born, to prevent them from, having children. So, really, this is something that is a shameful, history of this world and of the human race. As early or as late, or excuse me, as early as 1883, Francis Galton coined the term eugenics. We saw British Columbia pass the Hospitals for the Insane Act, talking about institutionalizing and removing people with disabilities from the general population. As of 1909, California enacted their first sterilization laws, making it legal to forcibly sterilize people with disabilities. And from 1909 to 1964, 20,000 people with disabilities were sterilized. The British Parliament passed the Mental Deficiency Act in 1913. Carrie Buck, one of the most famous cases that went before the Supreme Court, was sterilized at the Virginia Colony for Epileptics and the Feeble-Minded in 1927. And then perhaps most famously, we see these principles and beliefs adopted by Adolf Hitler, and he enacted a comprehensive sterilization law in 1933. And by 1940, thousands of Germans were taken from mental institutions and systematically gassed. And it wasn't just people like Adolf Hitler. There are a lot of people who are well-respected historical figures that were believers in eugenics. Some of those famous supporters include President Theodore Roosevelt, Winston Churchill. There were Harvard and Yale and Stanford scholars that believed in this, as well as the Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundation. So this is something that was widely accepted in society. And then we, as the civil rights movement gained power and we were working in the disability community, we saw a push to move from what's called the medical model, where you focus on the disability and the limitations of disability, and you look at how to cure disability, to moving to a social model which focuses on the quality of life, and including people in work, family, and community, giving people with disabilities a voice and letting them make decisions. And when it comes down to it, isn't that where we all are as people with wanting to, see the best for ourselves and our family in terms of finding a good job, getting a strong education, going on vacation, having a car, all of those things that we take for granted. And that's what the social model focuses on, is ensuring people with disabilities are included. So periodically throughout the presentation, I'm going to pause for a moment and introduce a disability civil rights leader. And a quote from that individual, Andy Imperato, is well respected person in the disability community. He served on Senator Tom Harkin's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He was the first CEO, full-time CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. He's currently the incoming executive director for Disability Rights California, and prior to this role, he served as the executive director for the Association of the University Centers on Disabilities. And he talks about it being easier to legislate and see change around bricks and mortar than it is around attitudes. So we're still, eugenics might be mainly a thing of the past, but we're still seeing impacts of stigma today. So, nearly 9 out of 10 people with mental health disabilities say that stigma and discrimination have a negative effect on their lives. According to the CDC, HIV, stigma, and discrimination affect the emotional well-being and mental health of people living with HIV. A study conducted on tweets related to epilepsy, so they're examining what's happening out there in social media. Of 10,000 tweets related to epilepsy, 40% of those tweets were derogatory. So the stigma's still there. We're still seeing things happen that are coloring the judgment of people with disabilities. Individuals with autism, a study done showed that 85% of college grads with autism are unemployed. We see that children with disabilities are 2 to 3 times more likely to be bullied than their non-disabled peers, and individuals with intellectual disabilities are more likely to experience violent and harassment, unemployment, poverty, poor health outcomes, and have little to no access to education. Another disability rights person of interest is Claudia Gordon. She was the special assistant to the director of OFCCP during the Obama administration, was also a public engagement advisor to the disability community through the White House Office of Public Engagement. She was an individual who lived in Jamaica and immigrated to the U.S. at age 11, and had become deaf in her childhood, and really just faced a lot of stigma. She wanted to become a lawyer. People told her, are you sure that's a good idea? You're a person who's deaf. Is that going to be something that's going to work out? But she persevered beyond all of that stigma, and has gone on to lead a great career, and talks about, for her passion is to, make it easier for other people with disabilities to make that journey. And she talks about those voices that tried to hold her back, and says, I understood then that those voices of doubt neither dictated my worth nor my capacity. And that's where we all need to take a stand, is making sure that the message we're sharing through our programs and in our community is that opportunity is there, and we support those opportunities for people in the disability community. So I'm going to take and move forward now and talk a little bit about some of the basics in inclusive communication, common etiquette when talking to people with disabilities, and tips for creating a welcoming environment. So it all starts with the basics, and that's understanding correct terminology. So a lot of people still use the term handicapped, and really we want to move away from that terminology and focus on person with a disability versus using the terminology handicapped person. The term handicapped has a lot of negative connotations in the disability community. So the proper term is disability. If you're talking about, handicapped parking or a handicapped entrance, you should really use the terminology accessible. So accessible parking, accessible entrance, that type of language. The other thing to just talk about here briefly is that idea of people first language. So, you really want to think about people with a disability as a person first, and that's why we say person with a disability as opposed to disabled person or handicapped person. Just thinking about that, you want to focus on who the individual is, and their contribution and who they are, right? You're not going to say my disabled son or my son with a disability, that's your son, right? So, just kind of thinking of that is focusing on the person first, rather than focusing on the disability. And Anil Lewis, who is the executive director for the National Federation of the Blind, when he talks about his journey after becoming a person with a disability and losing his sight, one of the things that he had to deal with is how everyone who had once respected him, now interacted with him in a way of pity. So, we have a saying here at Bender Consulting Services called paychecks, not pity, meaning that, really we want to talk about and talk to people with disabilities as equals and giving them the same opportunity to succeed as anybody else rather than focusing on their disability. I'm sure you've had, heard people say to somebody with a disability, oh, I'm so sorry, or I feel bad, or, I don't know how you accomplished that, and talking about everyday stuff. And that's the type of language, focusing and rooted in stigma and pity as opposed to, focusing on the individual. So a couple quick tips for communication and interaction etiquette. It all comes down to, treating people as you would anybody else. Greet people with disabilities as you would anyone else. So if you're shaking hands, also offer to shake hands with the person with a disability. They may shake hands with the other hand if they're an amputee, but you want to give that person the same opportunity. If it's a person who's blind, just let them know that you have your hand extended so they also know that to reach out and shake your hand. Speak directly to that individual with a disability, not to others and those who are around them. This happens to me a lot when I go out with my father, who's an individual who's blind. We'll go to a restaurant and that person will say, what does he want to order, or what does he want to drink? And, really we want to talk to the person and ask their opinion. Treat people with disabilities, again, that's the message throughout this slide is as anyone else. It's okay though to offer assistance. Just as you would have a colleague who's coming down the hall with a stack of papers and books, you would offer to, open the door or help carry something, offer assistance to a person with a disability if you see they may need help, but get their input first. Don't just, grab a person's wheelchair and push them, or grab a person's arm and direct them somewhere. Seek from them to understand what you can do and how you can best provide assistance, and be respectful of the person's independence and their privacy. So, not all disabilities are visible. If somebody talks to you or shares with you information about their disability or their personal journey with their disability, be respectful of that. Don't share those details with other people. And don't address the person's disability unless they address it first. A lot of people with disabilities experience this feeling that everybody thinks it's okay to come up to them and ask them questions about what it is to be a person with a disability and that's like. Just like a woman who's pregnant doesn't want strangers coming up and touching her belly, people with disabilities, want their privacy and independence respected as well. And again, don't apologize to a person that because they have a disability or pity them, when you're talking to them. Temple Grandin, who is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, is also a very famous autistic activist, said, I am different, not less. And, really what she's talking about here is seeing people with disabilities as equals. They may do things differently. They may, need an accommodation, but they are different, not less. So they also have ways and, interests in contributing to society, finding a job, all of those types of things. A lot of the day-to-day stressors that everybody experiences, those are all part of the normal life of a person with a disability as well. So there may be things, again, that are a little different for that person, but again, focus on, again, that people first, language and really, seeing a person with a disability as a person first. Um, just a couple more quick tips before we go on. We talked about using people descriptors first. Be aware that there are cultural differences between disability types. Most well known are, individuals in the deaf community. They capitalize the D in deaf, but there's very specific beliefs within that community. And not everybody who's deaf prescribes to, those particular beliefs. So, again, there's the conversation about being referred to as an autistic person versus a person with autism, and there are very strong beliefs on both sides within the autism community. So those are all things that you have to be aware of, the conversations that are happening. Avoid using language that emphasizes the disability over the person. So don't say the deaf, the blind, refer to a person as an epileptic. Really avoid using any language that implies negative connotations or really just focuses on that stigma. And those are, terminology such as crippled, lame, retarded, victim, referring to a person with a learning disability as being dumb, or saying somebody's stricken with a disease, or something like that. So all of those, talking about mental health, calling people crazy, those types of things, those are all very negative words associated with the disability community and can have a very hurtful impact when using them. And avoid using disability euphemisms such as special, different. I, as a woman, wouldn't refer to myself as somebody who is differently male. I would call myself a woman. People with disabilities, also want to experience pride, and kind of looking back at the conversation in the autistic community, that's the conversation that they're having. We want to, be proud of who we are as a person that has autism, and we do not want to, kind of see ourselves as separated from that, because we're proud of all of the things that we are as a person. And really, if you're unsure, because there are, different, beliefs and people feel different ways, the best thing to do is just ask the person with a disability for their preference. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about some engagement strategies. We're going to focus on some short-term immediate solutions, as well as talking about being proactive in planning for the future, and things that we can do long-term to make sure our programs and our employees are well-versed and inclusive. So just starting out, let's talk about some engagement strategies for wheelchair users. So when you're talking to a person who uses a wheelchair, really think about that wheelchair as being an extension of the person that's using it. If you've ever been to, a busy, let's say a walk for, epilepsy or something like that, then then we want to make sure that we don't lean on or touch a person's wheelchair. When we get in those busy environments, you'll see people who just won't even think about it. They'll lean over and they'll lean on a person's wheelchair, which is really just invasive of that person's personal space. And if you're having a conversation with a person with a disability who's using a wheelchair, if it's possible, consider the difference between height. I know I'm a short person. I spend a lot of time looking up. That happens for people who are wheelchair users as well. So if there's an opportunity to sit down and place yourself at eye level with that individual, that is something that you can take advantage of, and help to make that interaction a little more comfortable for that person rather than them feeling as if someone's constantly hovering over them. When interacting with people who are blind, some quick tips and useful things to do are to announce yourself when you're beginning a conversation or when you're entering a room. And announce when you're leaving. I can't tell you how many times my dad's been left talking to somebody who's no longer there. So he, is responding to a question or something, but that person has moved on and he doesn't know that that person has left the space where they were communicating. Don't be afraid to use common expressions that refer to sites such as see you later. My dad watches television. All of those comments are not things that you need to, be afraid will be offensive to that individual. And when directing a person who is blind, you can offer them an elbow to hold on to, and they'll follow you. Really try to avoid any situation where you're physically grabbing onto somebody and directing them or dragging them. That is, very startling to suddenly just have hands on your body and move you around. But something that people often do when they're interacting with somebody who's blind, and it all comes from an area of trying to be helpful, but it becomes less helpful when it's negatively impacting that person's feeling of control over their personal space. And then we have this lovely picture here of Bria, and Bria is a guide dog that one of our associates here at Bender Consulting Services headquarters use. And if you're anything like me and an animal lover, you look at that sweet face and those wistful eyes and you think, this dog wants me to pet it, right? and it's all about the love with the fur creatures, right? So, but it's really important to understand that service animals are working animals. Whether it's a dog that is helping a person who's blind or somebody in a wheelchair, or a dog that's assisting somebody with a mental health disability. There's specific training that these dogs go through, and interaction with people while on duty can negatively impact the training of that animal. So if you do encounter an individual with a service animal, please do not touch, don't flirt with, or make eye contact, feed or distract the animal. When the animal's working, if a lot of times you'll see they're wearing a harness or some type of vest, indicating that they are a service animal. When you see that, it's very good to be respectful of that. The animals know when they have that vest or harness on that there's certain professional behavior that they're being asked to have, and providing those distractions can be dangerous, not just for the individual who's relying on the service animal for assistance, but also for the service animal itself. So if the dog sees you and is paying attention to you and what you're doing across the way, then they're missing out on things that could be potential hazards in the environment, and allowing distraction to keep them from behaving in a professional manner. And then, just also, sometimes when the animal's not working, some of the owners will allow them to have some interaction or allow you to pet them, but just be respectful when somebody says no to that request, because it depends on the training in that particular individual. So just because one person says it's okay and another person says it isn't, doesn't mean that the person who's not allowing the interaction is doing that to be mean, to you or to the animal. It's really all about, ensuring everybody's safety. So let's take a moment and go through. We're going to have a few of these interspersed throughout the presentations, some scenarios for engagement. And as we're going through these, we'll talk about, some of the impact of these scenarios and how to, troubleshoot short and long term, with these particular types of situations. So if we consider a situation where we have an individual we're going to call Roger Wilkerson, who has recently joined a financial literacy program to seek assistance with planning a budget that will allow him to return to school. And, as a part of this program, there are workshop components that have activities and guides in print format. But Roger is an individual who's blind, so he has showed up for the workshop, and he's asking the leader if there are any of those forms available in an accessible format. And the workshop leader's not previously been asked to provide forms in an alternative format. It's not really sure what to do to ensure Roger can fully participate and engage in the session. So here are some things to consider when we talk about the barrier. The barrier is that the materials are only available in print, and the impact is that not all of the program participants are going to engage equally and get as much from the program as other people would. So, some of the things that we can do, kind of on the immediate or short term, we can provide a partner who can read the printed materials to the participants. Some quick things are, making sure that those descriptions are content focused. So, say something like the pie chart showing percentages on how to distribute income for savings, bills, and for entertainment versus using things like the bottom of the paper, it's the blue box, that type of thing. Some having a partner, sit down with somebody, a lot of times that will work as a quick fix. The person may ask if the materials are available in Braille, and you can make those materials available and link into services that can do that for you. But keep in mind that not all people who are blind do read Braille. And another option that you can do is making the materials available in an accessible electronic format, which you can either email to the person or you can provide them with a link where they can download the materials either onto their computer or onto their smartphone. Smartphone apps can be very useful in situations like these. But one of the things that is really helpful is just making sure that you're asking program participants as they're enrolling in the program if there are any accommodations they need, so that way you can make sure that that is provided ahead of time. And then once you have engaged in all of these strategies, you'll see the barrier will fall away. Another example of an engagement scenario, we have Robin Parker, who's a college student majoring in marketing, who's interested in volunteering at a local non-kill animal shelter as a part of her sorority community giving component. So, how do we make sure that we're inclusive in our volunteer programming? And what if we do have somebody who wants to enroll who has, for example, a mobility disability? So Robin has expressed interest in helping to walk the animals and create social media to help promote the animals for rehoming. So due to her love of animals, the shelter's really her first choice, right? So, she's showing that follow up and perseverance that we like to see in our volunteers and interns from the college area, and followed up 3 times now with the organization. But the shelter representative really isn't sure, how effective Robin could be in volunteering to assist with walking dogs, and has shared her concerns with the supervisor and is asking, how do we respond to Robin? What do we do? So here we're looking at a barrier of understanding a person's qualifications, and the potential impact here is a loss of talent and contribution, to the organization. And let's talk about some of the solutions, and really it starts with just being consistent with how you're reviewing volunteer applicants. Really that should be consistent whether it's a volunteer with or without a disability. If your normal process would be to meet with a volunteer applicant to understand, and explain your program and understand how they might be able to help the organization, that's the step to take. And you can ask questions about how someone, can perform the functions of the job, rather than focusing on questions about their disability. And keep in mind that just because somebody has a mobility disability or is a wheelchair user, don't assume their level of ability, especially when it comes to, physical areas. Many people with wheelchairs are also very athletic. They are, pet owners. So, it's possible that this individual, has had experience with large dogs, small dogs, so really, you can't assume that the person cannot perform the function until you talk to the person and understand their qualifications. And then you can, talk through what the needs of the organization are, and determine the best way that person can contribute as a volunteer. And then kind of long term, you can look at your different volunteer roles, identify, what are those essential tasks within those volunteer roles, and look at how you can accommodate for people with different types of disabilities based on the job role. And then, what happens is you get an increase of talent that's coming to you for, providing different assistance. And within the disability community, that reputation grows. So you'll end up seeing more volunteers coming through. So let's talk for a moment about people who have disabilities that affect their speech. Speech difficulty does not equate to poor communication skills or lack of understanding. Many people think that just because somebody has a speech-related disability, that does impact their comprehension, but that is not the case. If you're having a problem understanding something that somebody's saying, if they have a speech difficulty, ask the person to repeat themselves. Never pretend to understand what they're saying. A good tip is to just listen carefully and repeat back what you think you understood to ensure effective communications. And, another tip is to ask questions that have yes, no responses. That way, you can really ensure that you're understanding. And if you're talking to somebody who has a stutter or another type of speech difficulty, don't finish their sentences or assume what they're trying to say. That can be very frustrating, both for you as well as the person with a disability. And when talking to people who are deaf, keep in mind that they're not going to hear you calling their names. So the best thing to do is to tap them on the shoulder or the arm gently to, kind of get their attention, or wave to them. We do, one of the things that does happen a lot is, people look away or they address somebody else. Make sure you're looking directly at the person and speaking clearly in a normal tone of voice. That will make it easier for them to communicate with you and understand what you're saying. Keep your hands away from your face. So if you're covering up your mouth and your face while you're talking to them, that can impact their ability to understand you. And using short, simple sentences makes it easier as well. another thing is if you're engaging in conversations, it's important that not a bunch of different conversations are happening at one time. So if you're having a small meeting where a person who's deaf is part of that meeting and you get all of the side conversations going, it does impact that person's ability to understand everything that's going on. It really impacts the rest of the participants as well. And if the person is using a sign language interpreter, make sure to speak directly to that person and not to the interpreter. The interpreter's there as a facilitator, so direct questions and information should be directed to the person with the disability. So a few additional tips related to sign language and interpreting options. If you are looking at screening candidates and you have an applicant who is deaf, it is the responsibility of the employer to ensure an interpreter is provided during the screening process. But generally speaking, interpreters or real-time captioning are some good things to have available for formal training, large meeting, conferences. Interpreters don't necessarily need to be provided for small daily team collaboration. There are other technologies and options available, such as using instant messaging platforms, email, talk to text, or if all else fails and someone comes in who has a disability and is deaf, you can always use pen and paper, and really look at if you're looking at satisfying a last minute request for a sign language interpreter, video remote interpreting services could be appropriate for that situation. So if we take a scenario, are we still on the same slide again? When we take a scenario where somebody has requested a event interpreter or real-time captioning, that is something that an organization wants to be attentive to. So if we have Janet Chu, who's a leader in the philanthropic area of a major pharmaceutical company, she would oversee the distribution of $3.2 million over the next 16 months to organizations that complement her company's interests in healthy habits for children. And she has her assistant call, right? She's found your organization. They're hosting a gala. She wants to reserve a table, has her assistant call to reserve that table and wants to make sure that there's going to be captioning or sign language. Then you really want to make sure that folks know that, what to say when somebody makes that request and how to answer. So the barrier here really is whether or not the staff members are trained and aware of the accommodations that are available, and making sure that we don't assume there will not be people who are deaf at our fundraisers. So, if you are hosting a fundraiser, you want to make sure you're inclusive of the deaf community. An impact that can happen is the deaf community is very tight-knit, and you can gain a reputation for not being deaf friendly. And you'll experience less program, participants and less funding if that reputation, is built. So some things that we suggest when hosting a large fundraiser, such as, a gala or a symposium or something like that, ensuring members of the deaf community are included, provide a sign language interpreter or some type of captioning for that event. Ensure team members are trained to handle questions about accessibility. Make sure they know how to answer a video relay call, what that is. Most video relay callers, when calling in, the interpreter will ask if the person knows what that is and offer them some instruction at the beginning. So make sure that your folks know to listen to that instruction if they haven't done that before the first few times that they get a call like that. And if you're looking at one-on-one interactions or smaller meetings, it's not always necessary to have an interpreter. For that situation, you can use instant messaging, text messaging, and like I said, pen and paper, and situations like that. It just depends on um, the format of what you're doing. And again, the barrier goes away once you have uh, taken the steps to demonstrate and understand those particular solutions that we suggest. If we're looking at engaging with the autism community, it is suggested that you communicate again with clear and concise language. Some people with autism may not make eye contact. They may speak in a flat affect. This does not signal the person's level of engagement. So a person with autism could be even more excited than somebody who's coming across as bubbly. So don't allow yourself to feel like, oh, this person isn't interested in what I'm trying to tell them. For a person with an intellectual disability, if you're speaking to an individual with this type of disability, you may need to sometimes repeat or rephrase what you're saying. It's helpful to provide step-by-step instructions rather than giving a lot of information in one time. If you're helping them enroll in a program, you may want to, show them a picture of what the opportunities are, or show them a diagram. But kind of go through it step by step instead of giving a lot of information up front. Just looking at another example here, if we have somebody who is requesting a support person be available for a program, we have Darren Gilman, a high school junior who wants to participate in a summer STEM program in his community, in his robotics program at school, doing really well. I'm really excited about anything dealing with electronics and computers, but his parents are concerned about how he will be received into the program since they've had bad experiences in the past with bullying and after-school programs. So they've approached the organization that runs the program to ask them what their experience is working with someone with autism and if they can monitor the program. Now, the instructor strongly focuses on teamwork and creativity and initiative, and has found that sometimes having parents involved can make the students less inclined to speak up and can cause a distraction. So how do you as an organization, talk to both the instructor and the parents to alleviate these concerns? And really the concerns are just about there being a welcoming environment. So the students, if this doesn't doesn't get resolved, the student misses out on the opportunity to explore a career path of interest. So, what are some of the things that you can do? Definitely when talking to the parents, be honest about the level of experience the organization has with inclusion of somebody who has autism. Make sure that your focus is on the participant and what's best for that individual. An aid can be a benefit, but sometimes we've found that, that person may only need to be there for the first session. We have an individual with autism who works at our office, and he had an aide attend with him his first 2 days of employment, and has not had anybody come in since then, is doing an absolutely fabulous job in our office with supporting our recruitment functions. So, really just taking that time to meet with the student, meet with the instructor, making sure that you're addressing the accommodations and the concerns and really listening to what the situation is. And keep in mind, everything's going to be different for each person. So you need to understand what's going to work for that particular participant. And then just making sure that, across the board, that all programming instructors are understanding of the importance of a strong no bullying platform. And I know that that's something that has really caught on in our communities. is making sure that, that's not happening in our programming. And, with the resources that we're providing. But that goes a long way to alleviating parents who have really just gone through some horrific experiences. Keep in mind, not all disabilities can be seen. Not everything is visible. So there are people who have disabilities, such as those in the mental health community and other non-apparent disabilities. And really a lot of the things, kind of cross over. With this, there's a lot of stigma attached, especially to the mental health community and to other disabilities such as epilepsy or AIDS. So don't make mental health jokes, and really just remember that just because you can't see it doesn't mean that the disability isn't there. And we're just going to skip real quick over the last scenario because I know we're running short on time. But really, we just want to, thank everybody for participating today. And I'm going to transfer this back over to Mary.
Wow, thanks so much, Sherry. That was amazing. And we're confident that, all of you are now more empowered to effectively engage with those of us living with disabilities as applicants to your organizations, as colleagues, co-workers of yours, as program participants and business partners. And, it's just really wonderful, Sherry, to really boil down what you've shared with us. Just simple actions such as, respecting others, including others, engaging others, and clearly more than anything, communicating with others is so key. So we have the opportunity to field a few questions. I noticed that Kara Mastowi has asked if we could provide the name of the captioning company again. We'll definitely follow up with this information, but as we're speaking, the name of the company is Caption First. Their CEO is Pat Graves, a person who is hard of hearing, a great partner of ours, and again, they're a disability-owned business enterprise. So thanks so much for the question, Kara. Are there any other questions from the participants today? Thank you so much. I wanted to pass it on to Christy. Prior to doing so, just really again wanted to thank the FISA Foundation and the Heinz Endowments for taking leadership in advancing what is right and just for people living with disabilities and bringing this webinar series to market. A couple things just as a challenge, very quick. First, after this webinar, make a commitment to accessibility. Develop an accessibility statement and post it on your website. Next, commit to participating in an ADA 30 event. 2020 represents the year of celebration. Of course, we can't pass on the opportunity of sharing with you the call to action to register, if you've not already done so, for the upcoming webinar series. We'll be delivering webinars on website accessibility, social media accessibility, document accessibility, and creating accessible events. And certainly, please navigate to the Disability Inclusion and Access website. And I'll ask Christy when she rejoins to share the URL instructions for getting there. And most importantly, you should follow Christy Troutman on Twitter at Christy Troutman. So Christy, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Mary. I just want to say thanks again to the whole Bender team. Sherry LaPaglia did a fabulous job in really walking us through the history of eugenics, the origin of stigma, how it plays out today, as well as tips on communication, etiquette, how to be respectful, and I love those engagement scenarios. So for all of you as participants, we really appreciate you being with us here today. You've really already demonstrated your commitment to learning through your participation, and we hope that you'll take the next step. As Mary said with her challenge, share this information with others. Please be an advocate. So make sure you enlist others in putting this information to use in your organization. Every change we've seen in the disability rights movement, big and small, in removing barriers and increasing inclusion for people with disabilities, has been led by a champion, someone who wouldn't rest until changes were made. So be a champion for inclusion today. And we will look forward to being together again at future webinars. The URL for Disability Inclusion and Action moving forward is www.disabilityinclusionpgh.org. And FISA will also be putting out more information about local ADA 30 activities. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Christy. This is Mary bringing us to conclusion. A colleague from the Mattress Factory asked where we're able to access the recording, and that will be at the disabilityinclusionpgh.org website. So I wish all of you a wonderful day and a magnificent ADA 30. Thank you so much.